I'm Caitlin McKenzie from Baker Academic, and I'm here with Stephen Bouma-Prediger, author of For the Beauty of the Earth. Stephen, in your book you argue that there's often a disconnect between theology and ecology. Is this still the case? Is this changing?
It's an excellent question, which I often get asked. Often when I'm teaching Sunday school classes in local churches, I'll ask people for a show of hands, how many of you garden, how many of you bicycle, how many of you do kinds of things, outdoor activities of various sorts, how many of you recycle, and almost always everyone's hand goes up at some point. Then I will typically ask, so for how many of you is that a result of your faith? For very few people are able to say that they do those sorts of things because of their faith. Or often I'll talk about, I'll ask how many of you have heard a sermon on stewardship in a given church year, and everyone's hand goes up. And then when I ask them for how many of you was that sermon on earthkeeping or caring for creation, all hands go down. Stewardship typically then understood as giving tithes and offerings to the church. So a fair number of Christians, I think, do sort of green things, but for very few do they connect their faith. Is their faith the reason why they do those things? Now, having said that, I think it's true that in the last 10 years or so, this is changing. Many Christians, because they've re-examined their faith, they've reread the Bible, they've read books like For the Beauty of the Earth and many others, they become persuaded that part of what it means to be a Christian is to be an earthkeeper, which is really the thesis of the book. For others, for larger cultural reasons, they've changed. I mean, there's been a sea change, I think, in the last 10 or 15 years in North America and other parts of the world regarding the centrality of earthkeeping and care for creation. In large part because we've been made aware, the public more generally, of a great number of environmental and ecological degradations. Chapter 2 in For the Beauty is really a chapter that attempts to summarize much of the science and present data on 10 ecological degradations, things like species extinction and water depletion and desertification and climate change and so on, what my students sometimes jokingly call the thoroughly depressing chapter in the book when I'm using the book in classes. So for a variety of reasons, some of them just largely cultural, and others, Christians in the church more generally, I think, becoming aware of environmental issues, I think there's been quite a significant change. You see this in a variety of different denominations, and they're not all the usual suspects, the mainline, so-called mainline churches. United Methodist, Presbyterian Church USA, Episcopal, etc., but in more conservative and evangelical denominations, including Pentecostal traditions. You've seen books from pastors of churches, large and well-known churches in those traditions in the last decade, and now a spate of books from 20-something folks, recent graduates from evangelical colleges, people like Ben Lowe, recent Wheaton College graduate. So I think there are a lot of very hopeful signs that the church is starting to get it when it comes to environmental issues, and the wider culture as well. The question is, we need to act quickly on a number of these most important issues. Loss of biodiversity, for example, global climate change, and the real question is, will we be able to act quickly enough with this window of opportunity to act the next couple decades to stave off some of the scarier scenarios that, for example, climate scientists have put forward. But the Evangelical Environmental Network's been working at this for over 20 years. As I said, many churches now are doing all kinds of creation care activities, and including churches that many secular critics and others would never have thought 10 years ago would be at all interested in earthkeeping or care for creation.
Great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.